The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We are only a week away from what will be an election that will change the future of the United States, and I would argue the world. Either we will have the historic first ever election of a female president to the United States, women making up more than half of this country, yet we have never had a female president. That may happen next week. Or we may see a man who is, I'm confident he's a man. Anything else I can't really say with certitude, who seems to be clueless about most everything that relates to being president of the United States. A president-elect who just a month later, if indeed it is Donald Trump, will be the subject of a child rape case hearing in a court of law. Either way, this is going to be historic. We just don't yet know in what way history will be made, but we should see what the numbers tell us now that we are just a week away. We are going to look at three things because the polls have indeed tightened over the last couple of weeks. We will look at national polls. We will look at a state-by-state analysis, and we will also look at a few different 538.com forecasts. Let's begin indeed with the Real Clear Politics average of recent polls and list of recent polls. We had just a couple of weeks ago Hillary Clinton leading the Real Clear Politics average by about 6.5. Last week, we saw that shrink to about 5, and now Hillary Clinton's Real Clear Politics average lead over Donald Trump in a four-way race is just 2.2 percentage points. She is still leading almost every recent poll, just not nearly by the same margin that she was a couple of weeks ago. But this is just nationally. What about state by state? Well, it has tightened there as well. We will start with the electoral-vote.com electoral count map, and this is based on state-by-state polling. Hillary Clinton still well ahead, 323 electoral votes currently on her side, 215 for Donald Trump, but Trump has surged from about 170 predicted electoral votes to over 200. You still need 270 electoral votes to win, and Donald Trump is not there, but it has also tightened when you look at the national map. And we will also look at the 270towin.com electoral map, where it is closer, but still not that close. The electoral map at 270towin.com has it at 258 for Hillary Clinton and 157 for Donald Trump, with 123 electoral votes in the sort of undecided area. When you look at this map, though, I don't know that I buy it. I mean, Wisconsin is undecided here. I think that will go to Hillary Clinton. North Carolina isn't up for grabs in this map. I believe that will go to Hillary Clinton, and that would do it no matter what else happens. So that is something to think about. And then lastly, what does Nate Silver's 538.com forecast say? And we'll show you how this has changed over time. And when you look at the sort of mid-October high of Hillary Clinton up to a 90% chance of winning, according to Nate Silver's 538.com forecast, that has pretty consistently decreased to the roughly right now, according to the 538.com forecast, there's about a 3 in 4 chance that Hillary Clinton will win a week from today, and about a 1 in 4 chance for Donald Trump. One other thing I want to show you. This is super interesting. I've mentioned this, but I've never showed it. This is, according to 538.com, the chance that any one state has of being the decider in next Tuesday's election. And you'll notice that at the top of the list, we're looking at the left column here, if you're looking with me, Florida has a 13.9% chance of being the decider. In other words, of being the tipping point state in the upcoming election. Pennsylvania just below Florida at 12.7%, and then Michigan. So Florida, Pennsylvania, and Michigan together, the odds are quite good that they could be nearly 1 in 2 that one of those three states will tip the election. And of course, Pennsylvania and Michigan pretty clearly going in the direction of Hillary Clinton. Florida, still more of an up for grabs. So 1 week to go. We will see what happens. The key takeaway here is vote. I already voted on Friday. I am done. I now don't have to worry about it. Early voting available in many, many states. The funniest thing is when the Trump supporters do and don't believe the polls, Pat, because when Hillary Clinton was just crushing it, the polls are rigged. You can't believe the polls. It's all bogus. Now that the polls have tightened, the Trump supporters are coming out of the woodwork saying, look at the polls, it's now tied. Wait a second. If you didn't believe them when Trump was losing by 7 on average, why do you now believe them when it's within the margin of error? It's just what's convenient for them at the time, isn't it?
And the race is closer now. That's inarguable. But if you look at the 2012 election a week out, it was neck and neck in that race, too. And Obama won by 4 points. This map wasn't going to be good for any Republican, let alone a guy like Donald Trump. The
takeaway, again, is do not stay home. Go and vote between now and November 8th if you can, or on November 8th. Unless you're a Trump supporter, then go November 28th or whatever it was that at some point his campaign accidentally put out. Okay, let's talk about voter intimidation and your rights at the polls. You may have heard that Donald Trump has been talking about these election monitors, these poll watchers. If you want to make sure that it's not rigged for Hillary by mostly Republican state legislatures, governors, and voting commissions, but let's put that inconvenient fact aside for a second. You can sign up to help Trump monitor the polls to make sure that there's no, intimidation or the wrong people voting, whatever. In any case, this is making a lot of people say, oh, well, what's going to happen when I show up to vote on November 8th? We are expecting antagonism. We are expecting aggressiveness. There are some examples I want to give you of what you might experience at the polls. Questioning people about citizenship outside of the polls, questioning people about their criminal record, questioning people about qualifications to vote. That is voter intimidation, and you need to know how to deal with that, and I will tell you how to deal with that. Falsely presenting oneself in a way that makes it seem as though there's some kind of election official. This is something you need to be prepared for because there are going to be legitimate election officials at the polls. But with this cadre of incompetence that Donald Trump has been building through a website sign-up form, you're going to see people that are not officially involved with the election in any way that are going to be there, maybe intimidating, maybe aggressive. If anybody is walking around voting lines spreading false information, like, for example, hey, you have to be able to speak English to vote, but that's not true. Or here's the document you need to vote when it may not actually be true in a particular state you're voting in. Or displaying signs that are false or misleading about voter fraud. All of these activities fall under voter intimidation, and you need to know how to deal with this. So first of all, who can you report this to? Okay, let's start there. Number one, you can report voter intimidation to the Election Protection Hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE. You can also call the U.S. Department of Justice Voting Rights Hotline, 800-253-3931. And you can also talk to your local and state officials. This includes poll workers. This includes the county clerk, etc. Pat, do you think people in general are equipped and they know what to do or who to call? I think most people don't. People will show up and they'll say, that doesn't look right, but they won't actually be equipped with who to call or what to do. So I think this is really important.
Yeah, for the most part, this intimidation tactic could work. And we know that the Republican Party has a history of this. In 1981, they got in trouble for sending off-duty police officers to intimidate people that were voting in the New Jersey gubernatorial election.
Yeah, that's one very specific example, but many more. So who could actually be a poll monitor? You might show up and see people claiming that they are election officials, poll monitors, there to make sure everything is on the up and up. It depends on the state. But in many states, you actually have to be trained and certified and have paperwork with you. And in many states, you also have to be registered to vote in the location you are monitoring. So a few different things to be aware of. If you are not on the list of registered voters when you show up and you believe that you should be, if they can't find you, you ask for a provisional ballot. Every voter is entitled to a provisional ballot, even if you are not showing up in the registered book. And in the days after the election, in principle, that is a vote that is going to be counted if you're indeed authorized to vote. Number two, there cannot be campaigning at polling places as a general thing inside, And then the laws vary from state to state in terms of what is allowed outside and how far you have to be. You can campaign a certain number of feet from the front door type of thing. And I've experienced that many, many times. The important thing is, do not allow yourself to be scared into not voting. Know your rights. Have the numbers written down that I mentioned. You can go back and if you're watching this video on YouTube or check out the clip on YouTube. And also, you are able to involve local police if necessary. Don't forget that at any point, you can call local police if you believe that you have been intimidated, that there is an aggressive, non-authorized in many cases, poll watcher. Know your rights, know what you have to do. The ACLU has a very, very good and extensive write-up on this, because there are going to be, at least in some states, these Trump-supporting poll watchers there to intimidate. And we've got to make sure that every voter actually has their vote, that is able to cast their vote, and that the votes are counted. Here's something really weird from a Donald Trump rally that I want to tell you about. Donald Trump identified a black man at a rally in Kinston, North Carolina, as a protester and referred to him as a thug, and asked him actually whether he was paid $1,500 to be a thug. Trump had this guy removed from his event. It turns out that in spite of being black, this was the rarely spotted black Trump supporter. And I know that mathematically there aren't very many black Trump supporters. At one point, Donald Trump was polling, I believe it was in Ohio. Yeah, in Ohio, Trump was polling 0% with African Americans, but at least pretend like there's a black guy there who might support you if you're Trump. I'm talking about C.J. Carey, who is black. He told the local paper there in North Carolina that he supports Trump and wants to encourage him to be more inclusive of black people and women and people with disabilities and college students. He's on record as supporting Trump because he is, quote, honest, according to the 62-year-old Trump supporter. He had a note that he brought about his ideas for the campaign, and he was about 20 or 30 feet from the stage waving it, and Trump began slamming him, referring to him as a thug, and having the guy kicked out. This is a Trump supporter, mind you. Let's take a look at the video.
We have a protester. By the way, were you paid $1,500 to be a thug? Where's the protester?
Yeah.
Where is he? Was he paid? You can get him out. Get him out.
Oh, man.
Out.
Yeah. Recent polling puts Donald Trump's African-American support at 5.6% in the United States, Hillary Clinton at 84%, according to CNBC. This is just so funny in so many ways. On the one hand, Pat, mathematically, it is true that it's not very likely that black people in the crowd are supporting Trump, although it is a self-selected group. So you might say, well, even if only 5.6% nationally of black people support Trump, if they go to a Trump event, you might say, well, it's more likely than 1 in 20. But at the same time, the writing off of this guy as obviously a protesting thug, if you're trying to appeal to the black vote, this is not the way to do it.
No, it's not going to court black supporters whatsoever. And it's just crazy to see the mob mentality take over at these Trump rallies. I mean, they're just going to follow whatever their leader says to do. Kick him out. We'll pay for his legal fees, whatever it is.
And every single time I see a headline about what Trump did or said, this time Trump calls a black supporter a thug and kicks him out. I always think, I'm sure the headline is sensationalizing. And if I actually read the article or watch the video, it's not as described. It can't possibly be that bad. They must be exaggerating. And then I read the article or I watch the video, and it's usually as bad or worse than the headline actually suggests. And this, yet another example of that. Send me your thoughts about any of these stories. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and I will remind you, the 2017 David Pakman Show calendar is now available. It is available at davidpakman.com/calendar17. You can even get it for free with a yearly membership at davidpakman.com/calendar17.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day with the David Pakman Show membership program is Adam Smith. I love that we have a member named Adam Smith. It's just very, for a show that deals in economics and history and so much else. I like that. Thanks to Adam for being a David Pakman Show member. And I will remind you, the 2017 David Pakman Show calendars are now available. It is a comic book, it is a coloring book, and it is also a calendar. You can grab yours at davidpakman.com/calendar17. And you can get the calendar for free with a yearly membership, or just get the calendar itself. It's whatever you want, really. That's what I'm concerned with. You can have the calendar autographed or not autographed. The choice is yours. davidpakman.com/calendar17. I have some cringeworthy video of a Trump energy advisor clearly being clueless about how electricity works. The background of this is that during the main presidential debates, there were no real questions about very important issues. Climate change, 2 minutes, I think, across the three debates. Energy, some references to energy, but nothing really substantive. The environment, not much of a discussion about the environment. So there was a sort of side debate between Trevor Hauser and Congressman Kevin Cramer. Trevor Hauser is an energy advisor to Hillary Clinton, and Republican North Dakota Congressman Kevin Cramer is an energy advisor to the Trump campaign. And they did sort of like it's not really a moot debate, a mock debate. It is a debate. It's just a debate that very few people watched at the University of Richmond's law school. And a question came up about energy, and it was generally a pretty good discussion until Cramer starts talking about neurons during a question about energy and electricity, and clearly just has no idea whatsoever what on earth he's talking about. And I'm going to play that for you now, and then we'll talk about it.
Great question. And with regard to the federal role, I do want to get to that because it is complicated when you're talking about the movement of electricity. Neurons go where neurons want to go once they're on the line, right? and so Trevor talked about decentralizing, and that certainly is part of it.
Yeah.
But when you decentralize and you're generating more electricity than you can consume in a particular area, what do you do with that extra electricity, and who's responsible for it? You have interstate commerce laws, you have engineering challenges. So it's very, and Trevor and I both know this is very complicated. And if you study this, you'll find out it's economics, it's engineering, it's law.
I like how he tries to bring in the other guy. Trevor knows how complicated this is. Neurons, free to roam, free as the wind to go wherever they want. Trevor, by the way, looks completely perplexed at this point as to what the hell Cramer is talking about. So the mistake of neurons maybe isn't as bad as this whole thing of they go where they want to go. I mean, what on earth does that mean? And what does it have to do with renewable energy? Besides that, obviously, the neuron, he used the wrong word. We can chalk it up to that. But then he goes on to talk about the neurons go where they want to go. People can mix up a word by mistake. Hell, the other day on the show, Pat, I almost said erection instead of election. That can happen to anybody. But even once you've corrected the word neurons here, I don't know what this guy's talking about.
And the one thing that I hear from Trump supporters is that even though he's ignorant on certain policy issues, he'll delegate out responsibility and get the best people to work for him. Well, this guy doesn't seem to even understand electricity, and his environmental advisors don't accept global warming.
In his defense, you don't really need to know science to take bribes and accept lobbying money and accept campaign contributions in order to prevent progress on curbing climate change. And that's probably the actual role of a Trump energy advisor, just to figure out how to continue taking that lobbying money. This is just another little preview of the United States under Donald Trump. Vote November 8th. Neurons flowing free is yet another way in which we don't want Trump or anybody that he would put around him being in charge of anything in this country. Twice on Sunday, Donald Trump told audiences at two different rallies that electing Hillary Clinton could lead to an inflow of 650 million immigrants and refugees in just 1 week to the United States. Now, if you're familiar with anything, you probably realize that that's mathematically impossible and politically ludicrous, but that did not stop Donald Trump from saying it multiple times. First, in Colorado, Donald Trump said, but she wants open borders, and we have a quote to show you here. But she wants open borders. She wants open borders. We could have 600 million people pour into our country. Think of it. Once you have open borders like that, you don't have a country anymore. Well, okay, maybe in Greeley, Colorado, Trump said it, and then someone got to him and said, oh, that doesn't really make any sense. But no, when he got to New Mexico, he said it again. And I will show you that quote where Donald Trump said, she wants to let people just pour in. You could have 650 million people pour in and we do nothing about it. Think of it. That's what could happen. You triple the size of our country in 1 week. I have to hand it to Donald Trump. At least he seems to understand the number of people that live in this country, correctly asserting that going from 340 million, if you add 650 to that, you would have close to 1 billion people. At least if we have to find a silver lining in this insanity, Pat, and I know we've got to dig pretty damn deep to find one, Trump knows what the population of the U.S. is, which is nice for a presidential candidate.
Yeah, that's always good. And it seems like Hillary Clinton's policies on immigration would just be an extension of Obama's, which means more people going out than coming in and an increase in deportations.
Yeah, net outflow of immigrants to Mexico, relatively modest increases to the number of refugees that come in. But the numbers just make no sense with 650 million. If everyone from South America came to the U.S. in a week, that would be 422 million people. Add everybody from Central America, and we're at almost 600 million people. Add Canada, that gets us to 633 million people. We would still not even be at the number Donald Trump is talking about. And he's talking about in a week, which, by the way, would require border crossings to operate at 40 times capacity. The airport system of the United States couldn't handle it. There aren't enough rental cars in the United States to accommodate that number of people. There aren't enough houses. The Census Bureau estimates that there are 17 million empty housing units, and we've got about 5 million hotel rooms in the country. This is not a matter of politics. This is not a matter of policy. It's not even really a matter of math. It's a matter of basic common sense. And it is baffling that anybody is going to vote for this guy. Never mind the reality that somewhere between 40 and 52% of the electorate is probably going to end up voting for Donald Trump on November 8th. That is very, very disturbing. This doesn't pass the sniff test. This doesn't pass the most basic BS test. And it's fear-mongering. It's fear-mongering. And at this point, it's fear-mongering to the lowest of the lowest information voter, because who on this earth, never mind in the United States, would believe that in a week, 650 million people are going to come into the U.S. from other countries? It just makes absolutely no sense. Let's talk about cannabis, as many in our audience want me to describe it. Others refer to it as marijuana. Some call it pot. Some call it weed. But I am told the right way to discuss it is talking about cannabis. Last week, I told you that the Massachusetts alcohol and bar lobby is big league fear-mongering against cannabis legalization. They put out this insane ad, absurdities that make no sense, critiques against marijuana, all of which would be could be made much more strongly against the alcohol industry itself. And we said, well, there must be some connection between the expected revenues for alcohol in connection with or related to the legalization of cannabis. Well, there is now a really, really interesting report through Deloitte called Recreational Marijuana Insights and Opportunities, which says that legalized recreational cannabis in Canada would create a bigger than $22 billion industry, which would exceed the combined sales of beer, wine, and spirits. And to satisfy this Canadian market, 600,000 kilograms of cannabis would need to be grown yearly. Now, for comparison, there are currently 36 licensed medical marijuana growers in Canada. We are talking huge numbers here. And like in the US, a lot of the same issues are being discussed. The effects on health, road safety issues, criminal justice issues, exploring the financial implications and more. And there's really no answer other than money as to why we are seeing this lobby. And you speculated about this, Pat, that the impact of legal cannabis on alcohol, and I think you also mentioned cigarettes, you're probably going to see alcohol sales and cigarette sales decrease if you have legal cannabis. And that tells us everything in connection with this study from Deloitte. That's why the alcohol industry is so fixated on keeping cannabis illegal, because it's going to affect their market. And in Canada, the report predicts a bigger market being created for legal cannabis than what currently exists for alcohol. If you follow the money, you usually get to the answer.
And you have to wonder if all this money was already being generated by the black market, and now the public's just seeing the benefit, or if the fact that because it's legal now and seen as more legitimate, that it's creating a whole new wave of users to the product.
And normal disclaimers here. Weed isn't some miracle drug with no downsides. Smoking anything is bad for your lungs, regardless of whether CBD or THC have X, Y, or Z effect on whatever health condition you want to study. But think about the insanity of the situation. Hundreds of peer-reviewed medical studies regarding possible and likely medicinal benefits. An insanely upside-down criminal justice system insofar as the war on drugs is concerned. Disproportionate and racially tinged application of drug laws, including against nonviolent users in the U.S., and then the financial angle for states. It's all nuts. And the more we learn about the financial implications, like this report from Deloitte, the more we understand why this is going to be fought against by powerful and well-funded industries. If you think for a second about what legal cannabis is up against, huge funding source, the seizures of marijuana and property and cash, etc., for local police departments. Huge funding source for the DEA and federal agencies. Big Pharma is against the legalization of cannabis for obvious reasons, in that, hey, if this actually turns out to be a valid treatment for either symptoms or conditions, that's going to be bad for the pharmaceutical industrial complex, the alcohol industry, the cigarette lobby. None of these industries, none of these organizations, none of these apparatus want to see cannabis legalized. I still believe eventually it will happen. And individual states, like the handful of states that on November 8th have a ballot initiative, we're going in the right direction. But if you look, Pat, the odds are really stacked against this with big money.
Yeah, from what we've seen in the 5 states voting on legal recreational marijuana, it's leading in all 5. What we saw with gay marriage is state by state, they would legalize it, and then the Supreme Court looked at the whole issue and decided to pass it for the whole country. We're not going to see that with marijuana because it's not considered as much of a legal right.
No, I mean, it got to the point with same-sex marriage where it just became clear that at the state level, these individual bans on same-sex marriage are not constitutional. The Supreme Court got involved and decided that. When you're talking about legal cannabis, it's harder to argue that there's some kind of inherent right to legal cannabis. So I don't believe we're going to see a Supreme Court decision on legal cannabis. But what's the goal, right? It's basically twofold. If enough states say, we are legalizing cannabis, we're legalizing and regulating it, not unregulated. Ideally, you would see a decision made by the president and by Congress that will involve federal agencies where they will say, we are now going to completely leave this as an issue to the states, or we are just going to reschedule cannabis and we're going to stop the federal ban or federal illegality of cannabis because so many states have spoken about this in a democratic way. That's the dream, I guess you would say. And we've been following it and we're going to continue to follow it. In the meantime, what you can do is if you're in one of the states that has a ballot initiative on this on November 8th, vote in favor of decriminalization or legalization. And if you're in a state that does not have that on the ballot, start working on a ballot initiative for the next election.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Bill Scher is joining me today. He is editor at ourfuture.org and contributing editor at Politico. Bill, you've written a bit about the WikiLeaks attacks on Hillary Clinton. I believe that these attacks backfired in the sense that they only confirmed what any reasonable person already sort of knew or suspected about Hillary Clinton, right? Her ties to Wall Street, the reality that behind closed doors, she said to many of these companies, hey, you know what? It's not going to be that bad. I'm not going to be that hard on you if I'm president of the United States. I didn't really learn anything that shocked me. And I think that some people may have sort of overplayed their hand with regard to the speeches and the WikiLeaks. What do you think?
Well, I generally agree with that. If you already suspected Hillary Clinton was a calculating politician who was too close to Wall Street and isn't motivated by philosophical conviction, but does everything based on poll numbers, if you already assumed that, you could have your narrative validated by the emails. If you feel that Hillary Clinton is simply a politician doing what politicians do, and there's no politician that doesn't weigh those types of considerations, and there's no campaign staff that doesn't speak in unvarnished, pointed, condescending terms when communicating privately, you would also shrug it off. So we had a 2-week period after the Podesta emails were leaked by WikiLeaks, and Hillary's numbers were slightly better after a 2-week period. Now, there's some question how her numbers will hold up after the James Comey statement, but you have 2 weeks is plenty of time to assess what the WikiLeaks impact was, and it was not negative to Hillary. And I think that is relevant not just in terms of who's going to win on November 8th, but what is the power of cyber hacking and cyber warfare. The general assumption, at least the opinion of the intelligence community, is that this is led by the Russian government that fed this stuff to WikiLeaks, that their agenda is not to elect Trump per se, but to undermine American and global faith in American democratic institutions to make people think this is rigged and this is what really goes on behind the scenes and it's untoward and it's shady, and therefore people won't look at America as being on a higher moral authority, on a higher moral plane than Russia. But if the impact of this is people generally accepting this is what daily political life is like, and if you leaked anybody's emails, Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, you would get similar stuff. If you, not to mention Russian emails for that matter, that's not going to, that makes the tool of cyber warfare less potent.
Has the race fundamentally changed in light of the tightening national polls? I mean, earlier in the show, we sort of went through about a couple weeks ago, the Real Clear Politics average had Hillary Clinton closer to 6.5, 7 points ahead. Last week, that had been reduced to around 4.5 to 5. And then as of this morning, it's like a 2.2% average lead for Hillary Clinton in the polls. It's a pretty significant change nationally. It's not creating a huge shakeup electorally when you look at state by state polls. Is it just too early to know, really, whether these national poll tightenings are going to have an implication electorally?
Yeah, you have to be a little careful with the Real Clear Politics average here is, and I should say, one, I'm a contributor to Real Clear Politics, but two, I am not involved in the poll averaging. I'm not in their newsroom. I can't speak for them directly. So yeah. I'm speaking as much like an outsider like anybody else would. But I do know that the specific polls that get included in the average rotate depending on which polls are fresh. And there is an argument that the current polls in the average are the ones that have been more Republican leaning to date. Now there is like Rasmussen, for example, or the IBD TIPP tracking poll.
Love that
has generally been favorable to Trump. Now you have this one example which is catching everybody's attention, which is the ABC Washington Post poll, which has not been a pro-Trump poll, but it's had this very large swing over the past week from plus 12 Hillary to now it's actually plus 1 Hillary in the two-way and plus 1 Trump in the four-way. Mm-hmm. Most of that shift is before the Comey statement. And you didn't see that, and you haven't seen that kind of massive jump in other polling, and you're not seeing it in the state polling. I tend to look at what I call the Big Five, which includes ABC Washington Post, but also CNN, Fox, NBC Wall Street Journal, and CBS New York Times. We haven't seen those other 4 polls come out in a while. So I think you want to see a number of higher quality polls, which presumably will come out between now and election day. There's only so many days left before really saying, are we seeing a true tightening here, or is this the same stable race that we've basically had for the whole year, where Hillary's in the upper 40s and Trump is in the lower 40s, and he occasionally gets to around 45 in the averages, but never really seems to break through?
When we talk about claims of a, quote, rigged election with regard to whether it's polling or whether it's the management of elections at the state level, or as Donald Trump has sort of intimated, media coverage that is negative about Donald Trump, I'm really struggling to understand why, if we are to believe the allegation from some Trump supporters and even Trump himself, that corporate media is just out to destroy Trump, why have we seen almost no coverage of the Donald Trump child rape case that is pending? There's a hearing scheduled for December 16th. I mean, if corporate media really just had it in for Trump, wouldn't they be talking about that more?
I would assume. I have to say, I haven't followed the child rape accusations very closely. I've seen a headline here or there, but I haven't personally dug into it.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, that's fascinating that you're mentioning that.
I mean, but I take your point. Obviously, if you really had it in for Trump, you would do 7 days straight on that story, regardless of what the merits of the case was, because you had it in for him. Now, I do think that Trump has had lots of negative press, but so has Hillary Clinton. They both have had inordinate amount of negative press. I mean, Hillary's negative press goes from the beginning. There was a good time in the primary where Trump's press was, wow, nothing affects Trump. He defies the rules of political convention. He's leading a true juggernaut, and Hillary is just this stodgy, awful person from the Democratic establishment who can't answer questions about her emails. I mean, we have plenty of reporting about her emails and the Clinton Foundation and changes in her position. So you really can't argue that she's had some sort of free ride here. And Trump's negative coverage is almost solely all of his own making. I mean, it's not like the press has to, one, make up stuff, or two, talk about things that he's not talking about. When a negative story gets raised, he is always feeding the story and giving the media the obligation to cover what he is saying. So this is more an example of media management 101 being violated by Donald Trump than a matter of the media being rigged against Donald Trump. Hillary gets plenty of bad coverage, but her team, I wouldn't say perfectly, but does a far better job of how to respond to negative media coverage than Donald Trump does.
Are you worried that as a result of some of the coverage, as a result of claims of a rigged election or a not rigged election, is there any concern that the sort of net effect of all of this might lead would-be Hillary Clinton voters not to vote, either in early voting or on Election Day, in a way that could impact some swing states?
Well, this is, I think, the big wild card that you really cannot discern from polls. There was a question before the Comey announcement when all the polling showed sizable leads for Clinton. How would that affect turnout? Would that cause complacency on the Democratic side? Would that cause resignation on the Republican side? Would that boost third-party voting because there wouldn't be a sense of concern of being a spoiler? Or would third-party vote be depressed because they don't have a lot of money, not getting a lot of media attention? So there's all sorts of unknowns there. Now, with the Comey announcement, regardless of the polling, there is at least a sense in Trump world that the race is more winnable. So perhaps you would have a boost in Republican turnout relative to what you might have had a week ago. But you also may have a surge in Democratic turnout because now that sense of complacency is being mitigated. And maybe that all depresses third-party turnout because maybe I am going to be a spoiler, so I should be a little careful about that. So there's all sorts of unknowns here that we're just not going to be able to really know until the voting actually occurs.
Well, that is already happening in terms of early and absentee ballots, and we're only a week away from November 8th. So we'll be able to end the speculation soon and just have actual numbers, which I don't know about you, Bill, but I'm ready to move on at this point.
You'll miss it. You'll miss this election when it's over.
Bill Scher, editor at ourfuture.org, contributing editor at Politico. Thanks as always, Bill.
My pleasure.
The David Pakman Show. at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Students at the University of California, Berkeley held a day of protest on Friday to demand the creation of additional safe spaces for transgender and non-white students. And during the protest, they created a human chain to prevent white students from getting to class. Some Asian students were also blocked from getting to class. But Hispanic, Latino, Black students were allowed through and were allowed to go to class. And I'm going to play a little bit of video where you can actually hear protesters shouting, "Go around" to white students who try to get through this blockade. And students of color are greeted with "let him through, let her through, let them through." We have video. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what's your... Do you not want to be recorded?
Kind of not in this personal...
Okay, no.
They did not give you the consent to delete that video.
Okay.
Delete it right now.
All right, cool, thank you.
One protester actually complained that there were too many white students in classrooms, saying, quote, "When you walk into a class, what's the majority in there?" This is problematic to me, not only because it doesn't account for racial differences in the population at large, not only does it not consider that blaming individual white students who are already at the school solves absolutely nothing, but it's problematic to me because according to UC Berkeley's own website, only 1 in 4 students in the incoming 2015 freshman class was actually white, which makes this entire charade particularly misguided. Many white and Asian students forced to actually go through like the woods, essentially. It was a dirt path through brush in order to make it to class while the protesters were shouting "go around." And it's not just against white people. It's against white and Asian students, according to that article. And that sort of changes the dynamic. I got one email from someone saying, "David, the issue is not necessarily just race and minorities versus non-minorities, because Asians are minorities, but Asians maybe are seen as more successful in American society. So maybe there's a different feeling there, but we're also going to block the Asians from getting through." It really makes no sense. And we could talk a lot about the so-called ideal immigrant that many Asian communities represent in the US. But can you imagine, Pat, if the students blocked from getting to class actually filed a lawsuit on the basis of having their Title VI rights violated? Because if you look at the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and other characteristics at any program that receives any federal financial assistance, like, for example, UC Berkeley does. That could actually happen here.
Yeah, and there are some people who are of the opinion that reverse racism just doesn't exist. And of course, it's a much less prevalent issue, but it's out there.
I just call it racism. I mean, either
absolutely.
you're discriminating on the basis of race or you're not. And this idea of reverse racism is so bogus to me.
And when you look at gender equality too, of course, some issues negatively affect men, but the bulk of it negatively affects women.
Martin Luther King and so many others who fought for equality would see this, would be my guess, and they would say, well, hold on a second. What exactly are you doing by blocking white students? Are you showing them what it was like at some prior point? Because now non-white students aren't blocked from going to class. So what is it exactly that you're trying to do? Are you trying to wake people up to what was the experience of black students before the 1964 Civil Rights Act? Because I just don't know. I always try to be as pragmatic as possible with these issues. And I don't know what blocking white students is going to teach them today in terms of what the issues are that are trying to be brought to light. And let me remind you also that there is a demand being made here for the creation of safe spaces segregated by race where white people are not allowed, which we've covered, What would be the punishment if white students formed a chain to block non-white students from getting to class? What would be the reaction if white students created a no brown people allowed safe space on campus? It would rightly be very negative, and some will hear me say this and they'll say, well, the difference, David, is that the white students aren't oppressed, but the other students are. I'll remind you that only 1 out of 4 students in the incoming UC Berkeley 2015 freshman class was white. I don't get this, Pat. I don't know what they're hoping to achieve by inconveniencing, realistically, individuals that are already overworked, stressed out, and debt-ridden. I don't see the win.
Yeah, it's probably not the best way to go.
What are we going to call the David Pakman Show coffee blends? I've told you that the plan is we are going to have 2 blends, an espresso blend and a drip coffee blend. Whatever is your game, you will be able to take advantage of it. I am more of an espresso guy right now, but I used to be more into like French press and drip coffee. But we are going to make both available. We are going to be able to deliver it to you, ground however you like, or whole bean. That's usually the way I buy my coffee. And I asked for suggestions for names. And I have a couple things I want to play for you. First, here is one voicemail related to the naming of coffee. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David, I thought of an ironic name for your coffee brew, Beaner Brew. And also, I'm wondering what kind of roast are you going to do for your drip coffee? Is it going to be light roast, medium roast, dark roast? Let me know because I'd be interested.
Yeah, it's going to be slightly more than medium. I would call it like a medium plus roast. So here are some of the coffee name ideas that have come in so far, which I'll put up on the screen for you. The Roast of David Pakman, Any Number of Beans Coffee, Freedom of the Press. That's kind of interesting. I kind of like that. Pakman Perk. We've had a couple of suggestions for Progresso, but I'm not big on it because there's a soup brand named Progresso. But other people said, what about Progrespresso, like progressive and espresso? Okay, that's interesting. Pakman's Virility Roast. I like that. As an homage to your adopted American home, how about Wicked Roast or Wicked Good Roast for one of the coffee names? Yeah, that's too Boston-centric. I'm not that into that. Free Speech Still Drips. I like that. Ground in Independence is a good one. Progressive Wake-Up Call. Patriot Repellent. And lastly, The Stuff Alex Jones is On. My plan is keep sending them in. We've got a thread on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit, REDDIT, where you can comment on what your suggestions are for the coffee names. And you can also just email them in through our contact form at davidpakman.com or tweet them or put them as comments to this YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube right now. Next week, we will do a final sort of assembly of the best ones. We'll have people vote, and then we will decide on what the names will be of the David Pakman Show coffee roasts. Some good ones here, Pat. A lot of these are pretty clever.
Yeah, the funniest one may be the one about Alex Jones, the stuff that Alex Jones is on, but
Yeah,
I don't
which
know
of
if
course
it's
we can't do.
appropriate. It's
Yeah.
not appropriate because this is for our show.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely hilarious, but we probably should not reference other individuals, particularly with their own shows and their own lines of products. If you've seen all the stuff, we're selling coffee, which is so milquetoast compared to Alex Jones actually sells like male virility enhancement and autism prevention pills. I mean, anything you can imagine almost, Alex Jones is offering. I have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime. Here's a voicemail that I received.
Yes, this is Al from Tampa, and I wanted to ask David just one thing.
Yeah.
You're on Free Speech TV, but every time you play something that has a bad word in it, you bleep them. Well, I mean, what good is that if you're supposed to be on Free Speech TV?
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind answering that. Thank you.
Listen, I get it. We are on FCC regulated stations, both on television and on radio. So it's not that I want to be censoring bad words. It's that if we don't, our broadcast affiliates can get fined. And as much as I would like to unilaterally decide that you can't get in trouble anymore for putting up bad words on your radio or television channel, you still can. And I don't want to get our stations in trouble. That's just sort of the reality. So I agree. I wish we didn't have to deal with that. but we do in order to be on these broadcast affiliates. On today's bonus show, we will talk about listening clubs in London. It's pretty wacky, but interesting. I'll tell you about it. We will also tell you, we've covered discrimination against those who suffer from albinism. I will tell you about an albino beauty pageant that is going on. And also an overdue book returned after 42 years. Reminds me of a Seinfeld episode, but it is all too real. You can get the bonus show access by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. And hey, if you want a free 2017 David Pakman Show calendar with your membership, just go to davidpakman.com/calendar17 and you can get the calendar for free with your yearly membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.